I remember sitting in my car. I did not yet know that my youngest daughter had been taken in the attack. It was like this weird out-of-body experience, feeling like I was a ghost and nobody could see me, but I'm bearing witness to this.
I'm Sarah Ferris, true crime podcast producer.
And I'm Catherine Schweid, former head of the FBI's active shooter program.
And you're listening to Stop the Killing.
We are excited today to have somebody who I have moved in circles with for a decade and have never sat in a room and had a conversation with. Somebody who you may have read her name, seen her on any one of a million television shows or read about in books and things like that. She is Michele Gay, one of the parents who lost a child at the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting in December of 2012. So I would love to say welcome, Michele. I wish you weren't here. Is that okay if I say that?
Yes, absolutely. I'm with you. And yet here we are having these important conversations, talking about things that we wish we didn't have to talk about, but we do. And there's a lot of healing in these conversations. So it's a privilege to join you. There's a lot of learning from these conversations. And I believe, or I wouldn't have them, I really believe that we can make change through these conversations and the actions they inspire.
Thank you. I completely agree. And I feel a bit of an imposter to even have them with somebody who has dealt with the tragedy and translated that into what you have translated into. And that's part of what we wanted to share with the community today. We have a great group of listeners who do include a lot of parents who live in fear, especially more now than before, administrators, teachers. And I say that because this is probably one of the things that I hear most often when I go out to speak with people is I hear people say, is it making any difference? Are we doing any better? It doesn't seem like it's getting better. Things are getting worse. I have a different perspective, but I'd be curious to hear your perspective on it. But first, if you wouldn't mind, share a little bit with our audience about who you are and how you got into this situation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a teacher by trade. I'm born into generations of educators. So even though I said I was not going to be a teacher, I was adamant as a kid. I just fell into it naturally. I grew up in the Maryland area in between DC and Baltimore. And I started teaching, like many teachers, in the community where I grew up. And it was fantastic. But not long after I met my husband, and so I moved to the other side, the dark side, to Virginia. And
hey, I'm a Virginian. Hey.
Don't worry, I fell in love with it. So I started teaching in Northern Virginia for a while and loved that. But then I dragged my husband back to Maryland, and that's where we started our family. I had been teaching for about 10 years, and we made the practical decision to take advantage of my child rearing leave. I had a great package where I wasn't going to get paid or anything, but I could stay home for 3 years per child and still be guaranteed a teaching or administrative position in the district where I was teaching. So that's about as good as it gets.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, we ate a lot of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, but we made that work. It was just the most spectacular time in our lives. And in my life, I never expected to be a stay-at-home mom. And it was such a rewarding and exhausting gig. During that time, my husband got a job offer in the Northeast. So we moved up there because I could do the stay-at-home mom thing anywhere. The deal was that as long as we got to come back before my leave expired, I could head back to my career. I had just completed my master's right before taking leave. So I still had a lot that I felt I wanted to accomplish as an educator and a leader. So that was our deal. Then, of course, you make these plans and life takes you in completely different directions. We loved life in the Northeast so much. And so we decided to stay. During the time that we were up there, our youngest was diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum. And so I found myself using my career skills, my special educator skills for her. It was very much a full-time job, as well as being a mom to her two typical older sisters and just tending to our family. So So that's kind of where we were when December 14th happened in 2012. We were actually on the verge of a move to the Boston area, which was super exciting. There were a ton of resources waiting for our youngest daughter, Josephine, and for her big sisters, not too far away from all of our friends and pretty much family that we had made in Newtown, Connecticut. And, one Friday, about a month before our move, everything fell apart. We had a man from our community who had, you know, grown up in our community, went to school in our community, just flown completely under the radar and fallen through every conceivable crack in the system. I call it the system, but I'm talking about multiple systems: family, school interventions, community-based mental health, some pretty advanced mental health evaluations that were really good and solid. But as you know, Kate and Sarah, when all those things are happening in silos and those dots don't get connected, the worst thing can happen. And that's what happened in our case. This young man fell into an absolute spiral, really just a full-on mental health crisis. And during that time, he planned an attack on our elementary school, his former elementary school, likely because his mom was thinking about moving them out of town. He just lived with his mom. The family structure had really disintegrated over the years, but likely because of that sort of impending move and the possibility, we believe she was thinking of institutionalizing him. That is what left him feeling like he had probably no other options, and so he became suicidal. But before carrying out his own plan, wanted to carry out this mass murder at our school, and so he did. I had dropped my girls off at school on a typical, December Friday. And, my oldest two daughters came home that day, and our youngest daughter, Josephine, did not. So very much of every day after is about just determining to get up and get out of bed and find some purpose, as she did in every single day. Find some joy, find some way to make the world a better place, as she did. And so that's what we do. I founded Safe and Sound Schools with my co-founding partner, Alyssa Parker, who lost her beautiful daughter, Emily, one of Joey's best friends. And those two, I think, very much left us each other to heal and try to figure out how to breathe again and to find some purpose. And we found that purpose together. It was ensuring that other kids and other families could feel joy about going to school, not dread or worry or fear, that unfortunately so many of us have in the back of our minds because of what we now know, because we know now that it is possible and that it could happen anywhere. So we have a lot of work to do. And part of that hope for me is getting to connect with other people who see the hope, even in this, challenging time in our world, and do actually see that we're making great strides. I know on the surface, I get that same question that you get, Kate, where people are like, is it getting any better? It feels like it's getting worse. And there's a lot to unpack there, but I see tremendous progress. Our school leaders, law enforcement, our school-based mental health, community mental health, parents and students, custodians, lunch ladies, bus drivers, everybody, working together in so many of the communities that we get to serve at Safe and Sound. So I get to see a lot of that good work, and that makes each day possible for me.
I love that, because that's the hopefulness that I think keeps Sarah and I doing this. But it is an unending challenge. I feel like baby steps, right? Baby steps that happen. And, one of the things, if I could just step back and say, you started Safe and Sound Schools, and you and others. And if someone looked on Safe and Sound Schools today, safeandsoundschools.org, you will see an incredibly complex, sophisticated system in place that has conferences, training, partnerships with businesses and organizations, and webinars, and all kinds of things and information for people if you don't understand this business of saving lives, you can go to Safe and Sound Schools and understand it. There is so much there. So let me take you back to when you were deciding to create this and you came up with Safe and Sound Schools. Sandy Hook, I believe it was what you were thinking initially.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you remember that conversation or how it came about, the two of you?
Yeah, I have some very distinct memories. First and foremost, I remember on December 14th, 2012, sitting in my car, and I did not yet understand what had happened. I did not yet know that my youngest daughter had been taken in the attack. But I'm sitting in the middle of the chaos that you know well, as
Yeah,
an
I've been
expert in
at plenty
the
of
field.
those, unfortunately.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's just absolute mayhem. And it was like this weird out of body experience, just feeling like I was a ghost and nobody could see me. But I'm watching all of this, kind of bearing witness to this mess, really, of people running every which way and lots of emotion. And I just remember this kind of like, I don't know, this knowing kind of came over me, like, you will be working on this.
Wow.
Like this is something you have to do now. And
Wow.
just kind of tuck that in the back of my head, like, whatever, okay, But just I think for me, that was a moment of, oh, we can do so much better. I'm watching things that I know are supposed to be happening and they're not happening. A lot of things about reunification and crisis response in schools, believe it or not, educators, classroom teachers are pretty exposed and adept to some of those procedures. And I certainly was from my time in teaching. And I was just observing these things just absolutely falling apart. So I saw a lot of systems issues. I saw a lot of communication issues, parents that didn't know what their role was or where they were supposed to get information. And at that point, I knew that somebody who was not supposed to be able to was able to get into our school. And just that simple fact, I knew we could do better. I knew there were so many things that we could do to make sure that that doesn't happen, right? So just on the surface and in that moment, I kind of had that knowing, and then subsequent conversations with Alyssa, Emily's mom, where we were just trying to figure out what the heck had happened and process together. And we just kept coming back to the safety of our schools and
Right.
the fact that there were some very basic things that we could do to make a difference immediately, but that there were a lot of long-term things that needed some more work that we would need to engage in. And we saw the best of most people in our community. I mean, first responders from all of our neighboring towns, from neighboring states, from, I don't know, 30 agencies. I don't know how many the final count was, or if that could even be accurate, because everybody who had a radio and heard stopped what they were doing to come and help. And so we saw people from our community, mental health folks, school-based mental health folks, but nobody seemed to know their role and they didn't know how to work together. And that really stuck with us because that was a struggle after the tragedy as well. How do we do this? How do we do this recovery thing? And what do people need? And how do we talk to them? What do we do with all this money that's coming into our town? And all of these very complicated things that actually don't have to be that complicated if you talk about it and plan about it ahead of time. But you got to have the courage to do that. And as you know, many communities, Kate and Sarah, are going to put that conversation off because they don't want to think about that worst possible scenario, however unlikely it is. And unfortunately, when they don't, we saw what happens. There's just no plan in place. Everybody's having to think in a time of crisis and hurt and pain. And so that was kind of the beginning of us determining, we want to move forward in a positive way. We don't want to get sucked into the gun tug of war. It's just not going to be a healing place for our families. So that was a conscious choice on our part. Plus, several of our other families of loss were immediately drawn to that conversation and have stayed that course and continue to do that work and engage in those conversations. So Where we didn't see anybody engaging in conversation was around school safety and what does that even mean and who's in charge of that and what does that look like? And are we talking about preparing before or better responding or how to recover? And our answer was all of those things.
Right.
And so that's just kind of how it began to gel for Alyssa and me and how we created that comprehensive school safety framework to help everybody see there's a place for everybody in this. And if you're not in it, school psychologists or counselors or administrators or custodians or SROs or whoever you are in the community, then we don't have a full team. Then we're missing important players. But yeah, that's how it began to come together. We saw plenty of good people. We had national experts like you coming in and helping out. We just saw the siloing. It was so profound. We saw that all these folks were doing good work that was not interconnected. And so that became a core part of our mission.
Do you recall a conversation you had with someone from the White House, from Vice President Biden's office?
I do, because interestingly, Alyssa and I, since we were the only organization that was focusing on school safety at the time, there was outreach for us to come. There was the unveiling of the guide for high quality emergency operations. And so we were really excited about that because not only was somebody talking about these things, but it was being talked about on the federal level. So we had some early conversations about participating in the unveiling and all of that.
So I was on the other end of some of those calls. We had a phone call specifically. It was very early on with just a few of you. And there was only the vice president's office and two of us from the FBI on the call. And you were so angry, you're so angry and understandably angry and looking for solutions. And I was part of the team. That was one of our responsibilities. There were 6 or so of us. I was on the other side of that, hearing the frustration and the anger and helplessness of who I knew were parents who had just lost their children weeks before. And they were angry about, why are you doing this? And siloing is a message that we heard at the time. There was unending learning on all sides, that the less we communicated with each other, even though we thought we all had a good plan. So I appreciate your comments about how chaotic it was. And I think that it's a chaos that we don't even understand how chaotic it is.
No, it's hard to help people understand that. And yet it's really important to understand that because it just underscores the need for this kind of collaboration, planning, and communicating on a daily basis, every day in your community when it's a blue sky day, as I say all the time, because you just can't predict, and you can't possibly understand the chaos until you're living it. It's crazy.
I think that many times the reason I think I agreed to the podcast is it is a complex subject. And we talk about, one little thing in a whole hour or half an hour of a podcast or something. I think that taking everything in chunks and understanding it's a bunch of puzzle pieces, you and I have both come to learn. How do you convey that? Did you know that in the beginning? Like when you first started, did you realize how complex it is to worry about all these things that you've already mentioned?
I did, strangely, not to the depths that I do today, but as a school person, the school day and organizing that day and keeping kids and staff members safe on the daily is a huge part of what we do. We just don't realize it and talk about it and make intentional plans about it. We sort of expect everyone to just do their best.
Do their job. Don't let the kids get onto the bus until the bus are all stopped.
Follow the rules.
Yeah.
As an elementary educator, most of my colleagues in elementary and early ed were doobies. If the authority says do these discrete steps and do them in this order, that is what we are going to do. And we are not likely to deviate from that to the point where that can be dangerous, where you have to make a decision and you don't feel empowered to make that decision. You feel like you have to stop and think, should I, or what if I'm wrong?
That's an interesting that you put it that way, because as an FBI agent, as a lawyer, I'm a rule follower. As a member of a younger person in a family of 10, I just did whatever I was told, right? But one of the aspects of training in the FBI is that rules are there to be broken if they need to be. That must have been harder, perhaps, for schools and for kids, teaching a kid that it's okay to run from a building if you need to.
Oh, yeah.
That's really different.
It's a compliance-based culture that we have created in our schools, pre-K all the way up through 12, and to a degree in higher ed as well. Very strong compliance-based culture. It permeates into staff members as well. There's this intentional siloing of this is your lane.
Yeah.
And your responsibility, and this is mine, and we don't, deviate from that. And yet, by contrast, educators and children are pretty decent decision makers. When empowered, when properly educated, people can make really good decisions for themselves. And educators, school people, when I say educators, I'm talking about any adult who
Right.
lives and works in a school, right? Bus drivers, aides, lunch ladies, they're all educating our kids too. They have to make a million decisions in one day and have to do them on the fly in real time. And yet we have historically not leaned into that when it comes to safety. They have to ask permission for this or that or the other. Watching all of this mayhem, understanding that we had at the very least a very serious security violation. I didn't yet understand fully what had happened, but I was like, these are things that we can fix. This should never be. And these are absolutely things that we can begin to tackle. And then it started to get more into the mental health pieces. And as you start peeling the onion, you realize, wow, we can do things here and transform the culture. And then it just becomes this complex system that ideally is supporting safety for everybody.
Did you and Alyssa recall those first couple of opportunities where you sat down together, kind of kitchen table discussion or living room discussion, I imagine, with a pen and paper and said, what are we talking about? Do you remember those?
I do.
Was it just the two of you or were there others?
Yeah, we had others with us. We had a group of parents that were kind of like our therapy group, our support group that had just kind of naturally evolved. As you might imagine, with 26 families of loss, there were kind of clusters of us. And there was a pretty big cluster of us that was not represented in a lot of those high profile conversations and discussions and such. And so we just kind of found ourselves huddling together, supporting one another. And so there would be these sidebars, right? And Alyssa and I felt very passionately from the get-go about safety and particularly security. That for us was the place to start because, someone who wasn't supposed to be in our building on our campus had made his way into our locked building, right?
Sounds like that's your through line. That was your through line.
It really was. We were, and as a teacher, my gosh, student accountability, making sure that only authorized people are in the building, in my classroom, to me was just like a prime directive. So the fact that that had been violated in the first place, let alone all the myriad issues we unpacked afterwards. But I remember those kitchen conversations, lots of phone conversations, chatting with the other parents. And actually, what we got to was, there's some good stuff in every school community. We had a lot of good stuff in Sandy Hook in particular. Our leader, who we lost, our principal, was very passionate about student safety and staff safety. It was literally her prime directive. And
your kids had been trained for this.
Yeah.
I think that sometimes people don't recognize that your students actually had active shooter training before almost anybody had active shooter training.
Oh, well, we had lockdown training.
Right? Lockdown, sure.
Evacuation training. When we did our lockdown training, it was in case a bear ever got, that was kind of how we framed it for the kiddos.
That's the way to do it. That's the way to do it for an elementary school.
100%. So naturally, when everything began unfolding, my daughter, who was a fourth grader at the time in the building, just immediately thought there was a bear in the building, and those horrible sounds that she was hearing, those frightening noises, she was sure that it was, a bear pounding, trying to get into the classrooms. And that in and of itself was terrifying enough for her. Later on, she would, hear conversations and the 911 call from her teacher, and start putting the pieces together. But yeah, I think for us, that was the initial kind of like inroad to the safety conversation. But it was one of the fathers in our group that talked about what you're really talking about here is improvement, right? Because everybody's got something. And so it's about building upon that. That really resonated for me as an
Yeah,
educator. Because
I
so
love
much of
that.
we do is about improvement, right? We want to improve how we're teaching. We want to improve our processes, our procedures, even how we are conducting arrival and dismissal and, all of those things. There's always room for improvement. He came up with this idea, why don't you create an improvement process? That was something we started with, and we ended up calling it the straight A safety improvement process because each of the steps was an A. So it was like first assess your situation, basically do a landscape assessment. What do you have? What's missing? Then take action, create an action plan. Where are you going to start? What are your goals? What are you going to tackle? And lastly, audit, test it and check it in motion and refine it. It's this cyclical process that we began preaching to folks, and it became this framework. But it very much came out of early discussions with some of the other parents that were supporting us. This father was not a school person. He was a dad. He wasn't a security, law enforcement, or whatever.
Right.
But I loved that because it has to make sense to lay people.
Did
Everybody
you,
has to be able to participate in this.
yeah, did you find that as part of the surprise in the beginning? Like how little some people understood about the kind of stuff that you knew as an educator about school safety
Yeah,
and routine and things.
it was
But
very
then,
surprising and frustrating, to be honest with you. I'm like, what do you mean you don't know why? And I came to understand that's why people were perseverating on issues related to gun legislation. And I think that's an important piece of this. It's not a piece that we focus on as an organization, but it's an important piece of the discussion. It's important that people continue that work and continue those conversations. But I couldn't understand why nobody was looking at mental health at the time, why nobody was looking at safety planning, prevention, security, all of these things to me that were just low hanging fruit. And by the way, were like burning, pressing priorities for me because I had to send my two surviving daughters back to school. And you and I know any conversations surrounding guns in our country are going to be long-term conversations, right?
right, very much so.
But I was like, what are we doing to make sure that it's okay tomorrow? Like, what
Right.
is in place to ensure that in this world that we're living in right now, here today, that we have things in place to better prepare our kids, to empower them so they know what to do, our staff members, to give them that sense of safety and security and empowerment, but also to make sure that we're ready if we have to respond and we're ready if we have to recover the community because we were not ready, and that recovery phase, as our emergency managers, our FEMA folks talk about these phases,
Right.
that recovery phase is the rest of your life.
Hmm.
So it's long. There's a lot of work there, and yet it's very much absent from most of the school safety planning conversations.
So do you think that we're ready now?
I think as a nation, we're getting better. Some of the school communities that we have worked with over the years, uh, I'm just impressed is not even the right word. The way they have launched into this work, the leadership that has guided, it takes
Hmm.
leadership to do this work. The way, down to the cellular level that they have created a culture of safety is just absolutely where I want everybody to be, but not everybody is. We have a lot of work to do in a lot of individual schools and a lot of individual pockets around the country.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like you said, it's really complex. So it would be great if we could hand people something and say, all you got to do is this.
Which
You're
is what
good.
they want, right?
It is
Everybody
what
wants
they
one
want.
thing.
Yeah,
to
we
to
will.
work. I get asked this a lot. I was on an hour and a half meeting last night with the school board who really don't have any threat assessment, but they're anxious to set something up and they're
Mhm.
focused on trying to get that done before the school year, which I admire. But I also think, wow, you're just doing it. It's crazy in some ways to other people who've been doing it for a number of years. The
Yeah, I
idea
mean,
that you might gather information ahead of time about somebody who might be a danger to themselves or others.
and building, that's a whole process, right? That's a whole system that is so important to violence prevention in our schools and communities. And that's a long game, right? Teaching people that process, getting that plan in place, helping them understand we're going to be looking out for this individual of concern forever. We're going to be looking to support them and intervene. But at the same time, we have to have these other processes in tandem. We absolutely have to have security. We absolutely have to have good, solid processes for emergency management. We have to have those tier one interventions, educating our students and our staff, and some of those tier two interventions of providing counseling or small group instruction or a variety of other supports that we can put in place well before we get to a tier three type intervention like behavioral threat assessment.
So let me ask you this. What's the one thing we can do? What's the most important thing that needs to be done? How
So
do you
the
answer that
first
question?
first thing I try to do, and I'm sure you do too, is not, you know, strangle the person because it is a very frustrating thing to me. And I get it. I get it. I'm like that too. Like if I'm worried about a health concern or whatever, I want a quick read. What are the 5 things I can do to insulate myself from this worry or concern or threat? The way I answer it, and it's not often very satisfying to folks, is identify your team, start with your team, create a multidisciplinary school safety team.
I'm just
And
a parent. I don't know what that means.
I know. And it's like, look at our framework, look at those 6 key domains: mental and behavioral health, health and wellness, safety and security, culture and climate, leadership and law, and emergency operations and management, right? So, where do you think you fit in? Where can
Yes.
you help on the team? Go to your principal, whichever authority figure you have a connection with. Maybe it's the SRO that you have a connection with, the school counselor. Find out about the team. Is there anything you can do to help support the team? Do we have a team? Because if you don't have that team, the work is going to be very sort of, we call it cherry picking. Like, oh,
Yeah.
our neighbor school, they just installed this visitor management
They just
system.
did this. This must be
We
the
need that.
solution.
Yeah,
And
we
if
need
we
that.
do that, that will be everything. Is that a challenge? I think that, in our world, we understand that there are technical solutions like metal detectors, panic buttons, and alarms. And then there are the softer skills, the better
Yeah,
counseling and keeping track of people, threat assessments, and all those things. Um, do you find that people think one or the other is the
all the
solution?
time.
And
Yeah.
then they fight about you shouldn't spend money on this because you should spend money on that.
Oh, yeah. And it's a people discussion too. Like, we should be getting more school counselors, not more school SROs.
Right. I
And
hear
the
that a lot
answer
too.
nobody wants to hear is, no, you need more of both. And by the way, they better be working together as a pair, even better, working with the social worker. And then you start to help people understand this is the team thing, and we all have different skills and talents and perspectives that we should be bringing to that team. So it really starts with that team, and then the real work begins. We
So,
have a landscape assessment for all these different domains of safety.
right.
We begin to look at, okay, actually we're pretty solid maybe in physical safety because we thought that was it. We thought that as long as we had these tools and this technology for visitor management and communication, we were done. And those are, yes, important foundational pieces, but that's not all of it. So if you have those things in place, but your assessment reveals that you don't have a behavioral threat assessment team or process, and you don't have school counselors that are part of this process, that are delivering services into classrooms, educating kids about their mental health and wellness and how to get help when they're concerned, or how to get help when they're concerned about a friend, then
Mhm.
you're missing, another key piece.
So here's my next question that I answer all the time. I don't think we're making any progress. Do you think we're making any progress? The shootings still seem to go up and up.
Yeah. So it's really also not very satisfying for people to hear this, because they're not seeing evidence of this on the news. They're not seeing all of the saves, all of the catches. And some of them, as you know, are pretty dramatic. We
Mhm.
now house the averted school violence database at Safe and Sound Schools. So it is a collection of a lot of cases, some very dramatic, that were caught right at the last minute before an attack was about to take place, because somebody maybe bravely spoke up, or because a team member on that multidisciplinary team noticed something out of place or of concern and took action with the behavioral threat assessment team. And then some that the intervention is so early
Yeah.
that we can't even say for sure if that would have
Right.
become, an act of violence. But the idea is that is where we're putting all of our energy, that kids so early on expressing or showing any kind of signs of needing help or distress, that we are meeting those needs, we're
Mhm.
identifying them, and we're intervening to support that child long before that child gets to the point of suffering so extreme, like our perpetrator, that it ends in suicidal ideation and mass violence, right? So that's really hard for people to wrap their heads around, because we all want data, we all want results, and it's very hard to prove that negative, that we are
Yeah.
experiencing these saves every day. And sadly, a lot of them are kind of hidden, because many of our school communities are afraid of alarming the community with the truth, which is
Right.
these things are being caught every day. Guns in
Right.
schools, kids with plans, kids with suffering families, and on and on.
I understand what you're saying. I always say that look where you're standing and see how you can help. Are you a parent? Are you an educator? Are you a emergency person? Are you in your community, mental health, whatever it might be? Uh, I think the struggle that you were you know, in 2013
Yeah,
is nowhere near the struggle that you're in 2023. Is
I
that
would
safe
agree.
to say?
I would absolutely agree. So I feel a great difference in the level of education, the awareness, the preparedness, the types of tools and resources, hard and soft, that are available and in place in our schools.
You feel
Yeah,
better about what's available in schools?
I absolutely do. There's so much more that's available. There's so many school communities employing and implementing these interventions in a positive,
Hmm.
proactive way
What do
together.
you what do you still want to see done?
Oh, I want to see a lot more of it. I mean, I want everyone to understand that you don't get to be a blue ribbon school. You don't get to have that amazing graduation rate and student success unless there's safety. So,
Hmm.
full stop. That's your priority. If you can't focus first on student and staff safety, and know that you have done your job in those areas, then kids don't feel confident, teachers don't feel confident, parents don't feel confident, and that will eat away at the very culture that you need for kids to be successful. You have to stop and take stock, and you have to do that on a very regular basis. It has to be an active process.
I hear all the time. Yesterday, the last question I got was, what do you think about training kids? Maybe that's something that you should answer. But
Mhm.
it's kind of surprising in some ways to hear a school board member say that, what do I think about training kids? And maybe she asked that question because she had just moved from Nashville, where her community had just dealt with the Covenant school shooting. Maybe she was encouraging my voice to the rest of the board. But I
Mhm.
do hear people who say, well, you shouldn't train kids at all. I recognize that we're all experts in our own way, but can you answer that one question? Should you
I
train kids?
Yeah, I feel very strongly that you should train kids. I'm an elementary educator, and that's a powerful thing for an elementary educator who started out as an early educator in preschool to say that. But
Right.
here's the big thing, and this is where there's a ton of work to be done. You can't train kids, regardless of what age we're talking about 3, 5, 7, 10, 11, 18, the same way you are training adults. And
Correct.
you certainly cannot be training even school staff the way you are training adults like you or like
Completely
our first
agree.
responders. And so we've developed an entire curriculum around this. It's called Staying Safe, and we got to pilot it all year last year in Texas. They've invited us back again for another year. We have to train our staff in a way that is appropriate and manageable and psychologically safe for them as well, because it is, I guarantee you, not the same as how we're training our SROs, for example.
Right.
And then you also have to train according to developmental levels with your students. And that, again, is not a nice little easy answer for people. And so they kind of go, should we train them or not?
Yeah.
And not that at all. You absolutely should be training because that's education. And I'm biased as an educator, that's the answer to me. If you want to say there's one answer, it's educating people, but you have to meet them where they are, and you
It's how
have
you
to think,
train them.
yeah, what is their ability? What is their capability? And I'm talking about physically and psychologically. What is manageable and empowering for them? Because the second it's not manageable and empowering, we're giving them too much. It's not appropriate any longer.
Hmm.
So I would encourage folks to look on our website at our suite of developmentally appropriate teaching and training resources. We
Can you give
teach.
your website for us? Give your
Mhm.
website for
Yeah.
the listeners so they can pop on there right now.
Sure. If you go to safeandsoundschools.org and explore our straight A safety toolkits, you can find 3 key resources here. So there's one that teaches the developmental levels of safety readiness, kind of looks like a ladder. And it starts with a cute little preschooler and it goes all the way up to a professional adult first responder. It's obviously organized by chronological age. But then there's the other side of the scale, and that is people's actual abilities. So and many of us that are educators know, you might have before you a 15-year-old male student, but just because he's 15 years old and male does not mean that he is at an independent level. He may have trauma history, he may have cognitive delays, there may be physical challenges for this individual. So all that has to get weighed as we think about what is appropriate and manageable and empowering for this student. And some of the things that are empowering are actually just really simple things, like teaching people their options. FBI has done a good job with civilian training for run, hide, fight. We teach, okay, a different version for
Sure.
students appropriate for the school setting, but we're essentially teaching people their 3 core choices. And off of those choices come all kinds of other variations. But essentially, you need to be able to get out of a dangerous situation. You need to be able to keep a danger out, and you might need to hide out or remain out of sight from a danger. So we talk about those, and we talk about all of this in terms of an all hazards approach so that we're not hyper focusing on acts of violence.
Stop talking about shooting training, security
Yeah, just
training,
safety.
safety
Yeah,
training. That's all we're
yeah.
asking you to do. Think
That's
safety
what we
training.
say. Fire safety, wind
Right.
and weather.
Hmm.
And a lot of these, we talk about the tool belt approach. If I just give you these 3 tools, you would be surprised how many different ways you can use them and in how many different settings. So then we're not overwhelming our staff and we're not
Hmm.
overwhelming our kids, and we're actually leaning into their God-given instincts. And unfortunately, we have evidence of this today. We look at how our students and our staff made the choices they made at Sandy Hook, choices that kids and teachers made at Uvalde. They
Right.
lean into their abilities and their capabilities and instincts, and that's how we have to be
Hmm.
empowering, teaching, and training.
We always tell people on this podcast, be an upstander, be
Mhm.
empowered. You can all make an impact. And hopefully they hear that, our listeners hear that on a regular basis. But I think you bring a different ear and a different historical perspective to this because you have been in this nightmare and game and process for such a long time. What have you learned through this time period that somebody who is impacted by violence in their community tomorrow doesn't know?
There are a lot of really good people around you at all times, right? Even in the worst case scenario, when you listen to a lot of our mutual friends, Kate, are survivors. I have survivors in my family. They talk about the difference that it made for this person to do this for them or that for them. We have to remind people that, yes, we have a lot of work to do, but if you look around you, you are surrounded by people who, most of them, will rise well beyond what you ever would expect a human being to rise to in that worst situation. As we saw in Sandy Hook, people did amazing things for one another. My daughter talks about praying with one of her classmates who was, trying to comfort her so that she didn't worry about her little sister, because they could hear where the sounds were coming from. Our custodian who ran through the building shouting lockdown at the top of his lungs because nobody was able to make that call.
Right.
And so people are hearing these sounds and they're going, well, I gotta go see what that is, and literally putting themselves into the line of fire. We had 2 staff members that we lost in that way and 2 that were critically injured in that way. Just the amazing things that children and staff members did that day. And then all of the people then who came to support us, the very best in most of those people just rose right up to the top here in this worst day of our lives. So I think that we underestimate, we look at this big, gnarly, complex problem in our societies that violence is, and that tragedy and disaster, which is happening, weather stuff now is having a significant impact on a lot of our schools and communities. But there's tremendous innate goodness in your community and all around you. I think we all experience in post-tragedy communities, though, that pain eventually overtakes the community. And so without really thoughtful plans and safeguards in place, people start kind of turning on each other, for a lack of a better way to say it. They start competing for resources and things can get really hurtful. I think it's really important that those plans are in place, those discussions are there, that network is already in place, that the police already have made friends with the fire, and the school administrators and the mental health folks, and that they literally are playing the safety game as a team, ready to support each other so that they can all be the best they can be in our schools and communities.
When do you think your job is done?
I don't think my job's ever done in terms of trying to improve safety, trying to make sure that everybody's safe and sound in our schools and communities. That's a forever job for all of us. My mom, she's so sweet. She's in her upper 80s. When we talk, she says, is it getting any better? Are you like there's in her mind, like many, there's a goal, and we're going to hit that goal and we're going to be done and the world will be safe and happy. And I love that she thinks that way, and I would like her to have that. So I'm not going to take that away from her. But yes, we're just always going to keep working on this. And when I am so exhausted that I can't do it anymore, then I know, because we're already seeing the ranks rise up in this work. I was just talking yesterday to a student at Vanderbilt, and she's so excited about being a part of this community that we have nationally to improve school safety and ensure safe and sound schools. So we're just going to have to pass the mantle, right? And keep building the ranks, because as long as we have kids, and as long as we have schools, and as long as we have communities, we have to be working to keep everybody safe.
Thank you for joining us on Stop the Killing. Remember, these conversations aren't just important, they're necessary. If you're ready to dive deeper into the issues we cover, Catherine's book, Stop the Killing, and also How to Talk About Guns with Anyone are available now at catherineschweit.com. Stop the Killing is proudly produced by Sarah Ferris Media. For more award-winning podcasts like Conning the Con and Watching Two Detectives, visit sarahferrismedia.com. As an independent podcast, We rely on your support to keep these critical discussions alive. If you value our work, please consider supporting us on patreon.com/stopthekilling or by simply subscribing on Apple Podcasts now. Not only will you help us to continue this mission, but you'll also get early access to ad-free episodes and exclusive content that takes a deeper look into unfolding incidents. And don't forget, Stop the Killing is a team effort. You can make a difference by leaving a review on Apple and sharing this podcast with others. Together, we can keep pushing these conversations forward. Thank you for being part of this journey. Stay safe, stay informed, and let's continue to stop the killing.